What is up? It is NFL Week 3, which means it is time for Week 3 DFS. Did you lose a quarterback this week? Everybody else seems to have, and that is what we love about DFS. We can look past these injuries. We can pick our favorite guys as long as you can afford to get them in a lineup. That's the goal today. Let's build some good lineups. What is up? Welcome to the DFS Academy here at Club Fantasy. This is our weekly DFS show. I am your host, Ryan Weiss. With me, as always, Austin A. Mandolia. Austin, how are you doing on this fine Thursday evening?
Pretty good. I mean, it's always good to be doing this episode with you, even though it's happening in the middle of what we expect to be a bloodbath. But as far as games go that we can miss, I think this might be one that it's like, it's okay to miss it.
I agree. We should also look to just record a second episode during that Minnesota-Cincinnati game, because with those quarterbacks, I don't think anybody needs to watch that game. But yeah, it's for all the games we're probably going to miss this season because we record on Thursday night during the game. Miami, Buffalo, I'm okay with catching up on that one at halftime when this episode ends. I think that's going to work out perfectly. Guys, before we dig into the Week 3 main slate, I do want to remind you, first of all, we are talking about the Thursday night slate. Austin does put out an episode with Josh Hudson covering that Thursday night slate, but we don't just talk DFS. You can actually play with us as well. We run small leagues over on FanDuel and DraftKings. On FanDuel, we just run the main slate. On DraftKings, we run every slate, $2 contest, bragging rights, a little bit of money to help build your bankroll. If you guys are looking to join, you will find links in the description of this video. You will also find links on any DFS articles that drop on our website. This episode, I take the show sheet, I turn it into an article so you guys can read about it as well. If you don't have time to watch the whole show, or if you just want to read while you're watching, whatever works for you. I'll also kick to Austin real quick, because Austin, another great place for DFS information is our Discord.
Yes, come join our Discord. The link for that is in the show description. I am dropping my showdown contest in Discord every Thursday, Sunday, and Monday. So you'll see exactly what I'm playing every time we do that. And I'm there to talk about your lineups for Sunday as well. I'll talk about if I pivot, make any big decisions. And if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. We will talk about lineups, and people will throw stuff out there. We'll just talk through it. It's great. We're trying to build the community there. Come join us. And also, if you win big or not even that big, if you win a little bit, you can come and tell us, and we'll talk about it on the show.
Yeah, Austin, make sure those go into the show sheet. So if you guys hit something big, get it in there. We'll make sure we get it in the show sheet. Speaking of which, not one of our people, but someone hit something big last week. We call this section Answers to the Test. Even though we tend to focus a lot on cash on this show, we do like to talk about someone who is a newly made millionaire. We take a look at last week's Millie Maker lineup in Austin. My goodness, did you kind of call that this was going to happen? The first 2 weeks of the Millie Maker, pretty low scores. Week 3, I guess never mind. This is the second week. We're in week 3. I'm an idiot. Last week, very low score, won $1 million 2 weeks ago. This week, very high score, 260.2. Austin, that is 70 more points than won the $1 million in week 1. Let me go over this lineup and get your thoughts. Russell Wilson, Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey, who Austin did call on last week's show, Malik Neighbors, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Rome Odunze. Austin, I've been giving you credit on Rome Odunze and De'Ami Brown, who also scored the first touchdown of the Jacksonville game last week. He didn't make this lineup, but you had a great call on there. Jake Ferguson at tight end, Wan'Dale Robinson, my guy in the flex, and Austin's guy as well. And then the 49ers defense. Austin, my notes from this immediately are double stack with a bring back. So you have Russ with 2 of his pass catchers, Neighbors and Wan'Dale, but also Jake Ferguson from that same game. But then they go to the Chicago-Detroit game and go Amon-Ra St. Brown versus Rome Odunze. Basically, Austin, this lineup told a story about 2 NFL games, and it told that story perfectly.
Yeah, exactly. And this is one of the keys to these large field tournaments. And it's a principle that we want to use when we're playing those tournament settings, anyways, where the idea is if I hit on the right game, I'm going to win. And this person hit on the right game. I was really annoyed watching this game or box score watching this game because I didn't get to watch it live. But seeing the Giants and Dallas go back and forth and hit and keep going and hit overtime, I was like, oh, this one,
Yeah.
this
Who has
is
money
going
in
to
that
be the
game
one
except
that
for this
buries
guy?
me.
Yep. Yeah, it was not expected whatsoever, and I don't think I was bought in on either of these two games, Austin. I got to go back and look at some of my lineups. But actually, let's get into some of our own personal play. Austin, talk to me about your success or not success. Debrief week 2 for me.
Yeah. So I had a really good week 1. Week 2 was a little bit rougher for me. And I want to actually, part of the reason I want to talk about it is because there was a good lesson that came out of it. So I try and do this in 60 seconds. But first off, I want to throw out there, I went 27% in head to head. So it's not a great week, but that is why we play head to head contests, is because even though I didn't cash in my double up contest, I still was able to recoup some of my my earnings by playing in those head to head contests, because the idea in head to head contests is when you're playing a double up, you might not cash, but you could still beat 1,000, 1,500
Yeah.
other people, and just you didn't hit that 50% line. Well, take that idea when you play the head to head contest. Some of those 1,000 to 1,500 people you beat in the head to head, you might play them in head to heads. And so by
Yeah.
that, you can kind of say or hold back some of your losses. So that happened, which was good. But the real lesson from this week is that I pivoted off of a Dunze, which was a huge mistake, clearly. And it is what caused me to not hit the cash line. It was very directly correlated. Like if I had had him in, I would have doubled my money almost entirely. And the lesson for this is you don't always have to tweak your lineup. New information is sometimes it's just new information. You don't have to do anything with it. You can just let it be and let it sit there. You don't have to act on it, because what happened is Dallas Goedert was ruled out. And I thought, well, last year when Dallas Goedert was out,
Wide
Grant
receivers 8.
Calcaterra
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yep.
was the backup, and he was fine. He got 3 catches in the per game each time in those games. He would score touchdowns here and there. And so I thought, okay, let's go to Calcaterra. Let's save some money and change some things up elsewhere. And that's what buried me, is thinking I needed to tweak my lineup because I got new information, instead of just saying, you know what, I really like my lineup. I don't need to change it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to stick with it.
Yeah, I think it's such a good point. Just to give the quick rundown on what I did. I mentioned this to you guys last week. Trying to manage my bankroll a little bit this year. I got a little out of control last year. This year I don't have as much time as I'd like to. So Austin, I did not win $1 million. I'm sorry to report that was not me with this previous lineup, but I did win my money back for that entry in the head-to-heads. I did hit the cash line. I took some more Austin advice. This is what I love about doing the show with you, is I got into a single entry contest so that I didn't have somebody putting a whole bunch of lineups in or anything wild like that. I got into a single entry contest with what I thought was my safest lineup. Now, I had Justin Fields in my GPP lineup, so my safe lineup far outscored my risky lineup, but that's the whole point of this. I want my risky lineup to outscore it. It didn't. My safe lineup did what it needed to do, so I broke even last week. And if that's what I do for the rest of the season, then I had 17 chances to win $1 million for free. And that's how I'm looking at it. So
Exactly. That's the way to do it. Also, while we're on our wins, shout out Chris Molina, who is one of our writers and contributors. He went 4 for 4 and head-to-head contest on either the Sunday night or Monday night showdown slate, which was really fun to see, because I don't play cash for those showdown slates. And so to see somebody else crush it with those, it was like, shout out Chris. Way to go.
I think one of these days, if he's ever up to it, we should have Chris does basically how you and I do things. And I feel like you and his demeanors would gel so well. We should have Chris as a guest on the show. Chris, if you're listening in, let's get together. Let's get you as a guest on DFS Academy one of these days. Austin, we are moving to the cash plays. This is what I always refer to as your specialty. We start this with what we call top of the class. It is the expensive player, 8,000 or more. I remind you every week, we're probably talking DraftKings price. Nothing against FanDuel. More people play on DraftKings. That's what we're going with. And Austin, it's a familiar name here at the top of the class.
Yeah. We might talk about this player every week for the rest of the season. It's Christian McCaffrey. He is $8,200 on DraftKings, $9,100 on FanDuel, and I don't know what to really say. It's just like we play him. Like if he's available, he's healthy on the main slate and fairly reasonably priced, which he is, then I'm going to play him. The metric we always come back to is, can he 3x the salary? Seems he pretty consistently hits that 24-point mark. Like that's why we love him for fantasy.
Almost in the passing game by itself.
Exactly. And he's playing the Arizona Cardinals this week, who he has destroyed in the past. He's had like 4 touchdown games against the Cardinals. Like this is the type of game too where I especially am like, yeah, I'm not thinking twice about it. I'm hitting Christian McCaffrey and not worrying.
I think that makes a ton of sense. And it's Austin, for those who maybe just started with DFS last year, I imagine there's probably some newbies who pay attention to our show. They don't know how high the price on Christian McCaffrey can get. But there will be points where Christian McCaffrey on FanDuel is a $10,000 play. So even at 9,100, CMC is a discount right now on FanDuel.
Yes, completely. And there are ways that you can make up for that high salary on both platforms pretty easily. So stick around because we'll give you some cheap plays that you can play with Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, and something we always talk about on this show, it's a lot easier to fit those high salaries into your cash lineup sometimes than it is to your GPP lineup, because a lot of times the discount players, you're worried about them actually ever hitting the ceiling. Whereas over here, you can look for some of the discount players that have a safe floor.
Exactly.
All right. So that's the top of the class. Christian McCaffrey. Once again, we are moving on to the band nerds, the good students who spend a little bit too much time practicing those instruments. Not quite the top of the class. We are, of course, talking about the mid-tier players, $6,000 to $8,000 salaries. And Austin, you got some names here that I'm very enthralled by. It actually made me have to change up some of what I did for my GPP picks, because this is one of the first weeks you beat me to the show sheet. And I get nervous when my GPP picks are also your cash picks. And so I did my picks. Then I saw your cash picks. And I was like, I need to change. Or 1, this show's not going to be very interesting. Or 2, my picks might just be awful, which they are sometimes. But let's focus on that later on the show. Talk to me about why these guys are great cash picks.
Yeah, well, first off, we have Jackson Smith-Njigba, who is another guy that we might be coming to a lot this season based on how he's being utilized so far. So he's $6,500 on DraftKings, $8K on FanDuel. I'm a little bit weary of that price point on FanDuel just because we haven't seen him score a bunch of touchdowns yet. He's been more of the PPR reception hog, but in that vein, he was targeted 13 times in week 1, targeted 9 in week 2. So he's averaging at least double-digit targets through 2 weeks. I think that that's going to continue. He's clearly the number 1 target getter in this offense so far. And New Orleans, when you look into the app, they do look a little bit like a tough matchup for receivers, but I think that is mostly like bias because of the game scripts that they've been in, where the teams that they've been playing against have often gotten ahead and not needed to play, have not needed to throw that much. And they also played Kyler Murray. So like he's going to like rush a decent amount. And there are ways that I think that is actually being depressed. And JSN, I think he's going to be able to get enough volumes to still pay off his price, despite there maybe being a red color next to his matchup this week.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, is that sometimes I'm happy about those tough matchups in the app because it gives you an ability to kind of find an edge somewhere. If someone who plays the matchups and they're like, oh, Jackson Smith-Njigba has a tough matchup this week, that's not reading enough into this because he is so clearly his team's number 1 wide receiver.
Yeah, completely agree with that. Next up, I do have Javonte Williams in this section as well, which I am surprised that I'm talking about Javonte Williams this year, particularly in a cash contest. But he's $6,100 on DraftKings, $7,200 on FanDuel. Has an incredibly solid volume so far through the first 2 weeks. He had over 20 touches last week, including working the pass game, which is meaningful for him. Now, there were a lot of plays had in that game against the New York Giants. So he probably won't get that exact volume, but he's been the number 1 running back. Like it hasn't been as much of a distribution that we thought it might have been coming into the season. Chicago has also been really bad against running backs through the first 2 weeks of the season. So I think between his utilization in the pass game and how often he's touching the ball, he's got a really nice safe floor, which is exactly what we want for these cash contests.
Yeah, just to share a little bit, Austin, Javonte Williams was going to be my GPP pick because I thought going to this running game would be a way to be different from everybody who's going to jump into this passing game. And we're going to talk a lot more about the passing part of this game later. But what kind of hit me, and I guess this is full disrespect to Javonte Williams, is you're absolutely right. And it's the thought I had that made me feel better about it, is he's a floor play. I don't know that he's going to pop enough to win me $1 million. And that's kind of why I pivoted off. So
Yeah, I think it makes a ton of sense. We can talk more about that. I do think your head's actually in the right space, though, with I could see him also being GPP viable because people are going to want to play the receivers in that matchup. But for this cash section, one more player in this price range, in that 6 to 8K range that I have here, is, again, going back to Emeka Egbuka, who is $6,300 on DraftKings and also $6,300 on FanDuel.
I wish I had an alert button, because this is my favorite thing that we talk about. When a player is the same price on these two websites, something is wrong on one of these websites.
Something is wrong. I'm going to say FanDuel is the one that's wrong here, because I feel like Egbuka, like, he's getting enough volume and he can score the touchdowns too. So the volume for him has just been immediate and consistent. And so, like, I have no concerns right now with putting him in my lineup very consistently. I will just flag, he does have an injury tag right now. And so if he ends up being ruled out, Alvin Kamara and Brian Thomas Jr. are both in the same price range. Now, I know Brian Thomas Jr. didn't catch a lot of his targets over the past 2 weeks, but he's been getting the targets. And so I feel good about him, but I would probably, if my budget allows it, I would prefer Kamara, just because I know his role is really safe. And then if not, Brian Thomas, I feel pretty good about because of the volume there. So those are the pivots off of Egbuka, but if I have my preference, I'm going with Emeka Egbuka.
I love that. We've been having a little pushback on all of our redraft shows over the last 3 episodes of shows. We've been getting a ton of Emeka Egbuka start sit questions, and I am of the firm belief. We got this a lot with I think it was Cortland Sutton last year. Emeka Egbuka does not belong in start sit questions. He is a start every week. I'm not worried about the matchups until he gives me a reason to worry. Obviously, an injury tag causes a bit more concern, and it actually had me pivot off of somebody later on in the show as well. I'm someone, Austin, who I set a steadfast rule for myself a few years ago when I was in far too many leagues, and sometimes there's not enough time to check all your lineups. If someone is highly questionable, even if it's Emeka Egbuka, I take them out of my lineup because I'm worried they're going to get ruled out and I'm not going to have time to go make that change. So,
yeah, that's fair. And it does happen sometimes if you're not staying on top of things.
Yeah. And when you're in 20 plus leagues, it's sometimes hard. Trust me. A problem of my own creation. Bookworms, Austin, easily underestimated players. We are talking the value plays, $4,000 to $6,000. This is where our quarterback's coming into play. This is where our favorite player from last week's coming into play, but a couple other names that people need to be aware of as well.
Yeah, and if people watch this, they're going to get sick of hearing the same players every week. But there's a reason we go back to the same
until
players
they fix the prices. We have to.
Exactly. So for the quarterback position, at least, I'm looking at Drake May this week, who's $5,300 on DraftKings, $7,300 on FanDuel. Drake May has been pretty good so far. Hasn't hit like a super huge ceiling. Like, we're not seeing him pop 30 points so far, but he's been getting in that 16 to 20 point range for the first 2 weeks of the season, and I believe that. I think that that's going to be a pretty consistent outcome we see for him at $5,300 on DraftKings. He only needs to get about 15 points, 15.9 points to pay off that salary. He's been doing that so far. And if Sam Darnold can take down Pittsburgh, I feel pretty good that Drake May should be fine.
I had Pittsburgh fans asking me in the chat recently, is their defense cooked? Pittsburgh fans are panicked by this defense, and I think Drake May, certainly at home, can take advantage of that.
Yeah, certainly can. I will just note that $7,300 price tag on FanDuel does scare me off of him a little bit for cash. That's pretty high. So I might look elsewhere on FanDuel, but for DraftKings, he's a lot.
When I put my rankings together this week, one of the first things I do to fact check myself is I do my rankings without looking at anybody else's rankings. So I do my rankings, and then I go and look at the Football Guys consensus, and I see if there are blatant players that I don't have ranked that they do, or vice versa. And it was Drake May on DraftKings. Everybody had rated. I did not. I believe in possibly a Bryce Young pop game this week in garbage time now, after seeing what he did last week. And so I had Bryce Young on DraftKings rated. On FanDuel, I left Bryce Young rated and left Drake May out of my rankings for that exact reason, Austin, because of the price tag. So
yeah, it's a tough price tag on FanDuel, but on DraftKings, it should be very fine. We're going back to Rome Odunze, $5,300 on DraftKings. I don't understand why DraftKings isn't a little bit more reactive.
Thank you.
Like, exactly. Like, look, FanDuel is always more reactive in general than DraftKings is when it comes to price
Except
points.
for Amika Egbuka, apparently,
Except
but
for
that's
Amika.
another story.
Exactly. So Adunze is $6,400 on FanDuel. I think that's partially just because they don't believe in his ability to score touchdowns for some reason.
Yeah.
So I think Adunze should be like 7K right now on DraftKings. So this feels like a really nice deal for him. He's averaged double-digit targets both through 2 weeks, and Dallas is allowing the third most points to the receiver position through 2 weeks. So this is a really good environment for him. It's also the highest over-under on the slate. There are higher over-unders on the weekend, but for the actual main slate, this is the game with the highest over-under. And so it's a good environment for points. I feel really great about Rome Odunze in cash.
We added a new segment to the Wednesday show, Austin, where one of us picks the player of the week and one of us picks the game of the week. And this week was my responsibility to pick the game of the week. And I learned a lot from you last year. I consistently give you credit. I started looking at over-unders and implied totals. And when I checked, this game had the second highest over-under of the week, but it was also the only game where both teams were implied over 24 points. So that's why I picked it as my game of the week.
Yes, very, very clever. The high total, low spread is a very ideal place to be looking for potential receivers to attack in DFS.
There you go.
Moving further down our list, we have Jacoby Myers once again. This is another guy. He might be mentioned on the show every week. He's also averaging over 10 points per game. Like, why would we stop playing him? He's $5,600 on DraftKings, cheaper than Rome Odunze on FanDuel. He's $6,200 there. So I am playing both of these guys in my cash lineup, and I'm not sweating it at all.
Yeah, I don't have much to throw in there. I'm nervous about that Raiders offense, but you've pointed out to me multiple times. You can be nervous about an offense in cash if there's a player with a safe floor. You don't put nervous players in GPP. Austin, this next guy, I love him for this week. I have mixed feelings about him in redraft because people are all aboard, and I worry if that's a mistake. But for this week, I think you got to have him in your lineups.
Yeah, I haven't decided if I'm going to actually play Jordan Mason in my cash lineup yet or not, but he's definitely in my player pool. He's in the set of players that I'm considering because he's $5,400 on DraftKings, $5,800 on FanDuel. I would wish it to be a little bit cheaper, for it to be like, for me to consider it a free play. Usually when we have a situation where the number one running back gets hurt and suddenly it's a backup getting all the snaps, they're priced at like 4,500 or 4K. And at that point, I'm like, you have to play them. I don't care how good they are. You have to, because everybody's going to, and it's just going to zero out. I don't feel quite that way with Jordan Mason, but if you're deciding, so far through the show, like, if you may notice that I have picked a lot of like mid-priced receivers. If you're deciding that you want to pay up for, let's say, pay up at quarterback and pay up for Jaden Daniels, or if you want to pay up for one of the top receivers in Jamar Chase or CeeDee Lamb, then you may need to play Jordan Mason in your lineup in order to make that happen. I probably won't need Jordan Mason in my lineup, but because there's no Aaron Jones, he should be a consideration for cash lineups.
I'm also just going to protect our audience. Don't pay up for Jaden Daniels. I'm not even sure if he's going to play this week. But moving on, C's get degrees, the Ryan Weiss category, the punt plays of the week. Austin, below $4,000 over there on DraftKings.
Yes. So we're going back to two players that we've already talked about this week. One's a team. First, Harold Fannin. This is going to be the second week in a row. This is the guy that I took out of my lineup to put Grant Calcaterra in. And so that was big mistake on my part. So I'm going to try and not do that this week.
Yeah.
$3,600 on DraftKings. Another guy that's not getting priced up, despite being really consistent with his target volume, like a sub 4K tight end getting 5-6 targets a game consistently is ridiculous. Yeah. DraftKings, like, you need to get on it. And also the elite tight ends have not been hitting so far, not the way you need them to. And so until I can consistently trust them again in my cash lineups, I'm going to go with guys like Harold Fannin, who are cheap and able to get that consistent volume.
Yeah, Harold Fannin happens to be my stream of the week this week, Austin, which we talk about the correlation between that show and this show often. The one position that seems to be beating up on Green Bay right now is the tight end spot. And even, like, I don't want to hate David Njoku yet, But even if these guys split the average of what Green Bay's getting, that's 9 points a piece, and that's still Fannin almost 3xing his price. So
yeah, exactly. I feel like Njoku is like going to be an interesting GPP play throughout the season, unless they like totally phase him out. But
yep.
For cash purposes, I'm very much sticking with Harold Fannin for the time being.
I did it the most basic nerdy way ever. Harold Fannin is ranked in my DraftKings projections because it's PPR, and David Njoku is ranked in my FanDuel projections because it's touchdowns. So that's
Perfect.
how I did it. Yeah,
I love it. So the other team that we've already talked about this season on the show, but we didn't talk about them last week. It's the Houston Texans defense, who are $2,700 on DraftKings, $3,400 on FanDuel. This game could be hella gross between the Houston Texans and the Jacksonville Jaguars. Like, it's two really good defensive fronts against two really bad offensive lines. For cash, I'm going with the Houston Texans side because I like Will Anderson, first off, more than I like basically anybody on the Jags defense. And I think that he is likely to get at least a sack or two in this game. So it's really betting on them to be able to put pressure on the Jaguars offensive line. The last player I have for this segment.
What year is it?
4K. Let me take you back in time. It is Carson Wentz. And we had this conversation with Mac Jones last week. I don't think you need to play Carson Wentz necessarily, but he's 4K on DraftKings and 6K on FanDuel. He's worth a consideration. Do you think he can score 12 points this week? If you do, then he is worth considering in your cash lineup. I don't have a good read on if he's going to be a free square this week where everybody's playing him. I don't think he will be because I think that there's enough solid mid-tier quarterbacks like Drake May that people are just going to be like, you know what, I'll pay up like $1,500 and get Drake May. And also the receivers, like we've talked about in this episode, they're still cheap. Like all of those high volume guys, they're still cheap enough. Now, if we had a case where, let's say, Jacoby Myers, Rome Odunze were all above $6,500 on DraftKings, and that's like $1,200 more than they currently are, then suddenly you're like, okay, well, maybe I want to punt at quarterback and go with Carson Wentz and take the free square so I can still pay up for those receivers. So I don't think you need to do it this week, but it's worth considering. Again, this is like if you're trying to play, like you might be able to squeeze in CeeDee Lamb and Jamar Chase in your lineup, right, this week if you play Carson Wentz. So it's worth bringing up from that perspective, but I don't feel like you have to do it to cash.
I think it's such a great point you're making here. Another situation where, just to give people another reason to consider it, we talked about this back in week 1. I play in a very small friends league where 3 or 4 of us play every week, and I know they tend to pay up at quarterback. And we talked about this, Austin. One way I can be different from them is to go with the punt play at quarterback so that I can put the much safer CeeDee Lambs and Bijan Robinsons into my lineup.
Yeah, and I think for that contest in particular, might be a good.
I'm already building the lineup in my head as you're talking. It's a FanDuel, so it's a little different than what I would normally play on this. But I'm building that lineup in my head, and I'm like, oh, I think I can have some fun with that, where I can put Wentz in my lineup and then buy heavily into that Chicago-Dallas game and just hope that I'm right there. So
yeah, no, I love that.
All right, guys, we are moving off of cash. I will give you one last reminder. Well, it won't be a last reminder because I'll remind you again at the end of the show. You can play DFS with us. Links in the description of this video. I think we have the links somewhere in the Discord. If we don't, we should probably get those in there. I know Austin shared them at one point, but also any DFS article we drop, my matchup report, the recap of this show, they'll have the links in there too. $2 contest. You get bragging rights. You actually get your name announced if you win the main slates at the end of the show. We'll talk about those guys just a little bit later in the show. Maybe a name you've heard before. Often. We'll talk about that in a second. But now we move on to tournament play. And this is where I start to give some of my picks. I'm the guy on this show who shoots for $1 million every week. I just want to win the lottery, give my wife a little bit of money for being married to me for all these years. It's a reward she deserves. But for some reason, everybody else keeps winning it instead of me and setting better lineups. I don't know why you all hate me. We break this one down strictly by position. So we will go quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, defense, everything you need to start a lineup. Austin will usually give you multiple picks. I joke often. It's not a joke. Austin is the expert on the show. And Austin, I have not been great at DFS this season. Let me tell you, at least on my plays, my rankings have been okay, but my plays have not been okay. So take Austin's advice. And then I usually throw a contrarian pick out there, and Austin will usually tell me why it's probably a better tournament or cash play than tournament play. Sometimes I just don't get a good read on these. But Austin, enough about what I don't do right. Let's talk about some of these players you have here, because you picked my favorite player again. You got into the sheet before I did this week.
Yeah. So first off, we've already alluded to this game. I'm looking at how do I attack the Dallas Chicago Bears game this week, because it is the highest total on the slate. And I think it has a chance to actually like hit that total line. So sometimes it's like worth pivoting off of the highest total game, because they often actually hit the under when they're at that 50 plus over under range. But for this one, I think there's a good chance there. It's also by far the highest over under on the slate. So right now it's at 50.5 points for the over under. The next highest on the slate is 45.5. Again, there are some other games that are not on the main slate that are in between these two, but it's like far and above the best game environment of the week. And I'm looking at Caleb Williams here because it's my attempt to pivot off of Dak Prescott, just to gain leverage on him, because I think Dak Prescott is going to be more highly rostered than Caleb Williams. He is a little bit more expensive, but not that much more expensive. So it's like they're very similar players. And I think people are just going to be like, well, which is the better quarterback, and go to Dak Prescott.
Yeah.
And I think that's fair, but I want to look at Caleb Williams. It's not to say I'm not going to play Dak Prescott. It's just I'm also going to try and find ways to play Caleb Williams this week. So it's just I want exposure to that game. One of the ways that I'm going to do it is to not play Dak Prescott and go with Caleb Williams instead.
Think it's a great call. You say it often on the show. Get different, but not too different. I think that's you want a part of the big game. Maybe don't take the obvious quarterback, take the other guy. So.
Exactly. Now, I will say, because I do think that even though Caleb Williams will be, I think, more lowly rostered than Dak Prescott, I think they're both going to be pretty significantly rostered. I think this game is going to have a lot of action on it. So I wanted to name a couple of other guys for this segment. I usually only give one quarterback that I'm like super in on that week. But this week it feels like the Dallas Chicago game is going to be really chalky this week. And I think there are ways to get creative and unique in it, but it feels like so many people are going to be on it that to look elsewhere. I'm a little intrigued by Daniel Jones this week. He's $5,400 on DraftKings. He's $7,800 on FanDuel. I am not doing this on FanDuel. I want to make that clear. I'm only doing this on DraftKings, where he's $5,400, and it's to pivot off of Caleb Williams and Dak Prescott.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like people are like, I don't believe that Daniel Jones is actually good, and they're like waiting for him to fail. What if he does it one more week? Like I agree. I don't want to like, go trade away a first round 2026 pick for Daniel Jones or anything ridiculous like that to compete in the dynasty league. But for DFS, like if he continues to be the guy, and let's say the Chicago Dallas game hits the under, Daniel Jones could easily be somebody that hits the optimal, and you don't necessarily even need to stack him to make it happen. You could just do him by himself.
Yeah. I think it's a super fair point, because I'm one of those people, Austin. I am terrified of Daniel Jones. I own him in no leagues, certainly none of my dynasty leagues. I did not see this coming. I did not need to rush out to waivers to grab him in any leagues. But in DFS, it's a time to gamble. And if I start to, if I cash in one of these GPP tournaments, and I just mean a little bit of cash, obviously, if I win $1 million, I'll play 150 lineups with Daniel Jones in it. But right now, I don't build enough lineups where I can include Daniel Jones. But you make excellent points as to why you should. When I looked at my quarterback, I wholeheartedly agree on Caleb Williams. Again, a lot of the reasons you brought up, and kind of look at what worked last week. And what worked last week was picking the quarterback who was playing Dallas, because we haven't talked about it much. Russell Wilson had a hell of a week.
Yeah.
So why not Caleb Williams? But for diversity's sake, I'm going to go with a guy who I think has surprised a lot of people this year, not to the level of Daniel Jones, but Justin Herbert gets the Denver Broncos. And I think, Austin, this goes back to something we've talked about. There's going to be a big red number next to Justin Herbert's name, because that Denver defense looks good. In a divisional matchup, I do not care. Plus, if I remember correctly, I usually try to put this in my notes. I believe it's in Los Angeles and not in Denver, which I think is way better for Herbert. He is throwing the ball way more than anybody expected out of this offense. And Austin, I've been able to watch some of these games. that running game is not ready to take over that offense yet. There's no reason to move away from Justin Herbert with the 3 weapons he has, and he has just been slinging it. And we brought him up. If Daniel Jones can score 20 points against Denver, I fully believe Justin Herbert could drop 40 against Denver. It's not out of the realm of possibility. The worst thing that happens in this game is that the Chargers get up early because Bo Nix has looked very uneven to start the season. If the Chargers get up early and they don't have to throw, that's a problem. I don't necessarily see that happening. I like Justin Herbert as a sneaky play this week.
Yeah, I'm actually a fan of that because I was looking at this game and trying to decide if I was going to incorporate it myself when we got to tournaments this week, because I feel like there's some recency bias, maybe a little bit less recent than last week, but a little bit of recency bias with the Denver Broncos, and that people think that they are an elite defense. And that was the story coming into the year. Is they're probably one of the best defenses in the league.
Yeah.
The first 2 weeks, I mean, they held Tennessee, but it's Tennessee with a rookie quarterback.
They were on the Millie Maker lineup in week 1, Austin. Let's not bury them too far, but I get what you're saying.
But they haven't been like dominant. They've given up enough. Like they haven't shut down. I'll put it this way. They haven't prevented other players from having fantasy relevant games, at least consistently. And particularly last week, which caught my attention, is like, okay, if that narrative is still out there that Denver is just like this tough defense, don't play your guys against him. Playing Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen, stacking them, and then being out of this matchup, like I'm intrigued by that as a way to get different. And to your point, like Daniel Jones can do it. If the Indianapolis Colts can do it after what we saw from them last year, I feel intrigued. And the Chargers look way better. I do feel intrigued by it too. So I'm with you there.
Perfect. Let's move on to the running back costume. You got a couple more guys for us.
Yeah. So I first off have Jaylen Warren, which I am so surprised that I have Jaylen Warren in this matchup. It's honestly really sad for me that I have Jaylen Warren because I was a big Caleb Johnson truther. And that is not panning out right now. So Jaylen Warren, he's $5,500 on DraftKings, $6,200 on FanDuel. So we've talked about this a little bit already, but there's a lot of games this week that are in that 44 to 45 point over under range. And so one of the tricks, not necessarily a trick, but one of the challenges this week is deciding which games you think you're going to hit the over and which you're going to hit the under that are in that range. The ones that you hit the over are going to be more likely to have good fantasy performers in it and help you get different in your lineups. I'm intrigued by this matchup between Pittsburgh and New England. These two teams, they've shown they can put up a decent amount of points. Pittsburgh's defense, like we talked about earlier, hasn't been super stellar this year so far. And I feel like New England, like their defense was like solid, but I think that this could end up being a surprise back and forth affair. And Jaylen Warren's still the lead guy here. Caleb Johnson lost his kick return job. So like, I don't feel like he's taking over the running back role anytime soon.
I saw an interesting stat that Caleb Johnson played 15 snaps last week. I'm going to get it wrong, but four were on offense and 11 were on special teams. It could be vice versa, but regardless, he's about to lose a third of his snaps by not playing on special teams at least. So
yeah, exactly. And Warren was being used in the pass game as well. So I'm a fan of like taking him as kind of a one-off for this matchup. I mean, I might bring him back with like a Keyshawn Boutte or something like that. But I think Jaylen Warren is worth looking at this week. Similar style running back in terms of like the pass catching upside that we see. I'm really interested in Alvin Kamara this week. I mentioned him in the cash section as somebody to pivot towards if Emeka Egbuka sits, but I also really like him for tournaments this week. He has quietly been doing his same old thing where he touches the ball a lot, including catching a lot of passes, but has done it without scoring touchdowns, which I think is notable because I think because of that, he's been going under the radar a little bit. Seattle has not been defending running backs very well so far. They've allowed the 6 most points to the position through 2 weeks. And also, I think New Orleans is going to be playing from behind in this matchup. And that's just all the more reason for Alvin Kamara to have multiple catches in this. I will say I am only doing this on DraftKings. He is $8K on FanDuel. That is too much for my blood for Alvin Kamara. You have at that point, he has to score touchdowns to pay off. And I like it more on DraftKings because if he gets 6-7 catches, like it's gonna work out just fine.
Yeah, Austin, you mentioned people getting a little pricey on FanDuel. My running back play this week, I'm going to need to make room for in a lineup because I like the most expensive player at running back this week, and that is Bijan Robinson. And that is me simply saying I am going to take running backs playing the Carolina Panthers, even if they're chalk, even if they're expensive. We've talked about this before. If the guy is the guy who, quote unquote, breaks the slate, if he has that pop week potential, you want him in your lineup, even if he was the most expensive player, Austin, because you're trying to win $1 million. And when I look at this, I'm going to be honest, Austin, I went through this 4 or 5 times. I told you about my broken thought process with Javonte Williams. Bijan Robinson is the only running back that I truly see could break this thing wide open. It's the Carolina Panthers. They are not a good team. Bijan Robinson has looked great this year. I could see this one as long as Tyler Algier is not out here vulturing touchdowns, Austin. I think it could be a great Bijan Robinson week.
Yeah, well, the funny thing about it is you mentioned that I beat you to the show sheet earlier in the show, but I don't know if you realized this, but this was the point where I had paused.
You stopped and I came in.
You came in and you beat me to this pick because I had been, I this morning when I was working on the show sheet, I was eyeballing Bijan Robinson. I was like, do I go with him? Do I not go with him here? Do I do it? And I really like the pick too, because I weirdly feel like he's going to be low roster too. Like, I don't think he's going to be
so
super
expensive.
chalky. And I think that's part of the point. Like, sometimes the expensive plays are the way to get different because people are like, I don't want to pay $7,900 for Bijan Robinson on DraftKings. I do. He's going to score 30 points. And if he scores 30 points, like, that's fantastic for my lineup. And to your point, he could be the piece that you need. So I really love this going up against Carolina. And like, I don't think you necessarily need to bring it back with anybody on the Carolina side.
Do not.
Fair. You could. Like, I think Jatavian Sanders as a bring back, given the volume we saw last week, could be intriguing, but you don't have to force it. You could just pay Bijan Robinson and get out of this game.
What I will say is if you're playing on FanDuel, do not bring this back with a Carolina Panther. If you are playing on DraftKings, Jatavian Sanders and Tedoroa McMillan are interesting. Austin, my stack, if you will, it's a common stack that I've started using in DFS is going to be the Atlanta defense, but we'll talk about that in 2 more sections. Go ahead and talk to me a little bit about the wide receivers you have picked this week. As a reminder, Austin always gives you enough picks that you can build an Austin lineup. At running back, he only gave you 2 because I stole his third, I'm sure. But he did give you 4 wide receivers here as well.
Yes, exactly. So you could build a full lineup with these guys. You did actually pick one of my receivers for this one as well, but we'll get to that. I mentioned Caleb Williams during the quarterback section. So I am looking to stack him with DJ Moore. I think you can stack him with Rome Odunze and eat the chalk. I'm going to name that, and Ryan can talk more about Odunze in a minute.
Yeah,
but I think that it is also definitely worth pivoting off of Odunze and playing DJ Moore, who is $5,400 on DraftKings. He's only $100 more than Odunze on DraftKings, and he is $100 cheaper than Odunze on FanDuel. We've seen DJ Moore have these pop games. He can break open a 40-yard touchdown run where he catches it behind the line of scrimmage and then somehow ends up in the end zone. So I think he's the leverage play in this matchup. If you were to go that route, I think, again, we're talking about how do you get different in this matchup. I think DJ Moore is going to be one of the ways to do it.
100%.
Especially because I like going towards CeeDee Lamb this week. Now, Ryan has the other receiver that we can talk about in a second, but going back to CeeDee Lamb, I think is totally fine as well. He's $8K on DraftKings, $8,800 on FanDuel. He has 10 plus targets in both games so far and 100 plus receiving yards in both games. Quietly, we haven't talked about this with FanDuel this year, but they added the receiving bonuses this year.
I had no idea. I also noticed, Austin, we hated it last year. They took the Sunday night game off of the main slate. So.
They did, which I'm very thankful for.
Yeah.
But FanDuel has added receiving, rushing, and passing bonuses the same way that DraftKings does. So now the only difference between the scoring on the sites is half and full PPR. So because of that, CeeDee Lamb it also makes hitting that 100-yard bonus more impactful.
Very important.
On FanDuel than it is on DraftKings because of the number of points you're getting for that half point versus the full point for a reception. So just throwing that out there that you're almost guaranteed to get that 3-point bonus on both websites, but also he hasn't scored a touchdown yet so far this year, and it feels like he's due. And so to me, like if CeeDee Lamb, he just does what he's been doing the first 2 weeks of the season and then scores a touchdown or two, like he could have like a 30-40 point game. And you're like, it doesn't matter if 30-40% of the field played him. Like I needed him to be able to win.
I feel like this is the time of the show where I should give a public service announcement. I'm sure if Josh Hudson is watching at home, he is fully aware of what I'm about to say. I have given CeeDee Lamb my kiss of death this week. I predicted his as my 2-touchdown special on last night's Wednesday night show. So typically when I give someone a 2-touchdown special, they don't score any touchdowns, and sometimes they don't even catch a pass because I am the kiss of death with this. So I'm hoping I'm wrong, Austin. He's going to be in a ton of my lineups, but I do want to warn our audience that if this thing continues, my 2-touchdown special is a kiss of death.
Thanks for telling me that now.
There you go. Well, I mean, it's only for the show. You can fix your lineups now. You understand.
That's true. You've been informed. No, but I like CeeDee Lamb this week. Other two guys. We talked about Jason already. I don't need to talk about him as a player more, but this is to say that I think he's also GPP viable this week, particularly if you're able to fit him in a lineup with CeeDee Lamb. Like I think people are going to be like scared off of getting too chalky, and I think that there's like a degree to which we're having both of these guys. If they both score 30 to 40 points, it's worth it, and you can still get different elsewhere. I think pretty easily with this, especially if you have a guy like Jaylen Warren at your running back spot. So, big fan of that. And then I'll throw out Jawan Jennings, who's 5K on DraftKings, 6K on FanDuel. This one's an intriguing game environment to me. Arizona, San Francisco, it feels like they can hit the over. Like it's a divisional matchup. I feel like they've had a history of some weird games where they go back and forth. He was heavily utilized last week with Mac Jones under center. It seems like Brock Purdy might be trending towards playing. So I don't want to read too much into that, but I do think that we saw Jawan Jennings have those pop games last year anyways. And so I feel like it's still worth looking towards him, especially as I know he's been dealing with injury, but if he's coming into this game healthy and if he's active, I think he's worth looking at because I think he's going to get enough target volume with the lack of pass catchers that they just have in general in that offense. You're on mute.
I don't remember muting myself. I am so weirded out, thank you, by the NFL's injury stuff that's been going on lately. This guy was supposed to be out 3 to 5 weeks, and now a week later, they're like, we think he's going to play. Everything's going to be fine now. So not quite sure what's happening there, but and I mean Brock Purdy, by the way, not Jawan Jennings. And so it's, again, I agree with you, though. I don't think it matters who's the quarterback, but I think Mac Jones is probably the better play, and I just don't see them rushing Brock Purdy back.
Yeah.
For me, Austin, again, looked at wide receiver. You had a lot of the guys I like. Actually, you hadn't even had wide receivers in yet, but you did have a Dunze up at the top. Rome Odunze is my favorite wide receiver pick this week by far. I have in my notes that I think he's going to be too chalk. And Austin, I'm going to talk to you about this because I think you have moved me off of this. And again, I'm building my lineups in my head as we're doing this, my lineup, because I put one in that Millie Maker. I was worried Bijan would be chalk. But you're thinking he might be overpriced to be chalk, which then putting Rome in, because we've talked all show about how he is underpriced, that kind of helps me when I'm building this full ceiling lineup. And so, again, I'm probably going to get a Dunze in, but let me get to the player who I'm supposed to talk about here, which is the other part, probably the only part. No, not the only part, because there's one more part we're going to talk about in this Chicago-Dallas game. Man, this was the Chicago-Dallas show. But I'm going to talk about George Pickens at wide receiver. And Austin, part of the reason I wanted to get this in here is because we spend so much time talking about ideal DraftKings picks. I think George Pickens is an ideal FanDuel pick.
Yeah.
Only a $300 point difference or price difference, 59 on DraftKings, only 62 on FanDuel. I think that's an advantage on FanDuel because I do think this is going to be a heavy touchdown week for the Dallas Cowboys passing offense. And I think we see Pickens get into the end zone 1, maybe 2 times, kiss of death. But I also said, Austin, I think it's a good way to get different in this game. I think the standard lineups are going to be Dak Lamb with an Odunze bring back or Caleb with a Lamb bring back. I don't think anybody's going, I need to get George Pickens in my lineup. I might be wrong, but certainly on FanDuel, I think there's an advantage there. And again, it's just, we're betting on this being a big game. I did not expect this whole show to be a tribute to the Dallas-Chicago game. My God, that better be a good game. Because as we move on to tight end, Austin, we got to talk about one more piece of this offense. But again, you've given us two tight end options.
Yeah, well, it's funny that I gave my favorite tight end, and then I was like, well, I do need to mention this tight end as well, and it's Jake Ferguson, who is $4K on DraftKings and $5,200 on FanDuel. It's easy to pivot onto George Pickens, Ryan. Anybody can do that.
You're not going to insult me saying I take the easy way out on things. I certainly do.
So why not just
get degrees, Austin?
Why not just pivot a little further to Jake Ferguson? Jokes aside, I think to your point, Ryan, everybody's going to want to play CeeDee Lamb in some form or fashion. He's either going to be on the other side of a bring back with Caleb Williams, or he's going to be stacked with Dak Prescott. I think an interesting way to play this game is to combine our players here, combine our approaches, and say, let's go with Dak Prescott, George Pickens, and Jake Ferguson. And
we saw it win the $1 million last week.
Exactly. That's going to be a way to get a lot of leverage off of the field, off of CeeDee Lamb. And if you do curse him with your kiss of death, then
we win. I love this.
Exactly. Which, side note, that's kind of the fun of playing DFS. Like, it can be a good bet that some of these players hit their receiving overs or hit their unders, but they're also still viable in DFS. That's part of the fun with this. So I really like looking at Jake Ferguson this week. I will say my actual favorite pick that I think I will be playing him in one lineup. It's Tyler Warren. We'll be stacking him with Daniel Jones, which I never thought I would be doing this. I was not super excited about Tyler Warren coming into the year, or Daniel Jones.
Nobody's ever been super excited about Daniel Jones.
Well, I was that one year, unfortunately. But he's $4,400 on DraftKings, $5,600 on FanDuel. He's been really heavily utilized and hasn't scored a touchdown this week. And there's several guys like this where I'm like, they're getting the volume, but they're not scoring touchdowns. And so I could see some touchdown regression coming for a few guys like that. And so Tyler Warren is in that category for me. He's been consistently getting like 10 to 12 points without scoring a touchdown. So if he manages to do what he's been doing and also gets in the end zone, then I think he's going to pay off really well. And I think people are going to overlook him in GPP tournaments. So it's a way to get different really easily. Yep.
Wholeheartedly agree. I also was not high on Tyler Warren coming into this season. He was one of the first players I put into my rankings this morning when I did my DFS rankings. You can't deny his role in that offense, and I think that's always important when it comes to tight ends. It's going to be very important. And the guy I'm going to bring up, Austin, I was fully ready to write about Tucker Kraft. And then I got the little sleeper alert that said Tucker Kraft injures knee in practice. I just did a quick search before I jumped in here. Packers are saying he checked out fine. He is likely to play this week. I will say that is an article from 2 hours ago. We are recording this at 9:26 on Thursday night. 2 hours ago, they said he checked out fine. 4 hours ago, they said his week 3 status is up in the air. I don't like to mess around with that, so I'm going to go with a guaranteed volume play. Give me Juwan Johnson. He's in Seattle. 3,900 on DraftKings, 5,700 on FanDuel, volume. And Austin, you said this for Alvin Kamara. I'm going to say it again for Juwan Johnson. The Saints are always going to be playing from behind. Those two players are their safest players. Juwan Johnson's cheap volume at tight end, and he found the end zone last week, though I will argue I do not believe that should have been a touchdown. Somehow the pylon, which is fully out of bounds in an NFL game, is not ruled out of bounds, which makes no sense to me, but I guess it's because technically it should be air. I am not happy with the Juwan Johnson touchdown call, but I did have him in some lineups. Shout out to our buddy HoofTube. So I'll take the touchdown. Hopefully this week it's a little bit more solidified and I don't have to worry about the refs giving me a touchdown.
That's fair. It's never a good feeling when you're like, I need this call to probably go the wrong way so that I can.
Yeah, I distinctly remember walking into my kitchen and going, well, that was a terrible call. I just was not happy about it, but it worked out well. Austin, this might be our first show where we run over. I guess it happens sometimes. We're having such great conversation about the Cowboys and Dallas game, but let's get to defenses on this GPP play and get out of this section.
Yeah, I'll just quickly talk about the Jacksonville Jaguars. They're pretty cheap. Again, I mentioned earlier, this game's probably going to be really gross. I think Houston and Jacksonville are going to be fighting for which team has the worst O-line in this matchup. I don't know who's going to win that battle, but I think Houston will be more rostered, and so Jacksonville is an equally fine pivot. And I do not trust the Houston O-line at all. But also, defenses don't matter that much. It's just a friendly reminder, like, don't overthink it too much. The Millie making winning lineup last week got 5 points from their defense.
Exactly. San Francisco had a better week in week 1 than they did in week 2. So,
yeah, exactly.
Austin, I'm continually picking on the Carolina Panthers. It is who I have become as a person. I'm a Carolina Panthers hater. But more importantly, your Falcons have the number 2 fantasy defense, and they are dirt cheap, taking on, in my opinion, one of the worst offenses in the NFL. 3,200 on DraftKings, 3,800 on FanDuel, and their pass rush. You guys went out and got those 2 edge rushers, and they are doing their damn job. I'm loving what I'm seeing from the Falcons defense.
Yeah, I don't think I will ever be able to pick the Atlanta Falcons defense again, because I think the last time I did that, they buried me in a lineup. But I'm glad you're giving them some respect.
Yeah. And again, I talk about one of my new strategies I play a lot, and that is if I love a running back, I'm going to pick that defense. My story in that game is that Atlanta gets up, they give the ball to Bijan Robinson, their defense gets after it in the pass rush. That's my story in the Atlanta game. Those are the only ways I would really play that Atlanta game, because except I mentioned Tedero McMillan on DraftKings for the PPR. I'm worried about Drake London until we see him fully healthy and start to get in the rhythm of things. So I'll take the running back. I'll take the defense.
Yeah, I love that correlation move.
There we go. We wrap the show up with what we call the valedictorian shootout. This is me versus Austin in DraftKings scoring. This is just for fun, just for bragging rights. And the bragging rights are fully one-sided this season. Austin is now 2-0 with a 21-point beatdown last week. Quarterback cost me, I think he beat me by 16 points at quarterback. I did my best to fight back, but when Justin Fields goes down, well, I don't even say when he goes down. When Justin Fields, I tried to pay attention to this. I swear to you, Austin, I don't think he had a yard in the third quarter, and that was before the injury. Because I also bet his over on total yardage, which is a story for another degenerate day. And I watched him go into halftime. I swear to you, Austin, at 76. And at the end of the third quarter, he was still at 76. It's an ugly game for Justin Fields. I deserve to lose. Austin is 2-0 in the valedictorian shootout. I will continue to announce my lineup first. You have heard every name except for 2 of these on this show today. Caleb Williams at quarterback, Bijan Robinson at running back, along with Jalen Warren. This is a 4 wide receiver build, so those will be my only running backs. Rome Odunze, George Pickens, sticking with that game. That's the Caleb stack with the bring back on Pickens. Austin, I love Puka Nacua. Josh gave a stat last night on No Pun Intended that Puka Nacua tends to eat the Eagles' lunch. I had enough money to get him in my lineup. I wasn't going to pass that up. I needed a cheap play. Austin, I'm going to bet on one of these rookies to finally have a good game. It's the right matchup for it. Yet again, I think Travis Hunter could possibly beat Houston. I've watched these games enough. The kid has an interesting role. They're just not, he and Trevor Lawrence are not on the same page. So I'm betting that it's going to be this week. And then it's my tight end play, Juwan Johnson, my defense play, the Atlanta Falcons.
All right. So we're going to have very little overlap this week, which is fun. I have Drake May at quarterback at 5,300. I'm going with a 2 running back build this week with Christian McCaffrey at $8,200 and Javonte Williams at 6,100. All of the receivers that I talked about earlier, Jackson Smith-Njigba at 6,500, Jacoby Myers at 5,600, Rome Odunze at 5,300, and Emeka Egbuka at 6,300. I will say I'm noticing right now, I'm going to make sure I move Rome Odunze into my flex spot because he plays in the 4:00 games. Yeah. And so if I am down going into the 4:00 games, I will probably move off of Odunze because he's so chalky. I won't be able to move up the board in those double ups. So just a little lineup tweak there. But then I'll have Harold Fannin at tight end at 3,600 and the Houston Texans defense at $2,700. Got $400 of wiggle room left in case I need to pay up somewhere else, which is nice.
So for these lineups, we don't change them. This is just me versus Austin. Even if someone's hurt, this is what you get for making a lineup on a Thursday. This is also all for fun and games. So it encourages us to play safe. I will say, Austin, I always tell this story. Austin's lineup will be different when he plays against you folks if you want to join the class and play with us. Mine will also be different because I am doing Caleb Williams against Austin. I think I am going to pivot to Justin Herbert and probably make some switches for when I play against the audience. And as I mentioned, you can play with us on both DraftKings and FanDuel. Our contest that Austin and I just announced are DraftKings scoring, but we run a contest on FanDuel. We always announce the winners. Austin, I can't say for sure. You may be the first back-to-back winner we've seen on this show. Austin takes week 1 and week 2 on the DraftKings, 153-10. Back-to-back wins, your 9th win all-time. And a friend of the show, Jay Malalaga, takes the FanDuel lineup, 142 points. When you see that you scored 153 in full PPR, that makes 142 really solid. That was his first win of the season. DraftKings shows me how many times you won all-time. FanDuel starts a new contest every year, so I can only see how many times you've won this season. So congratulations, Austin. Congratulations, Jay Malaga. And if you'd like to hear your name announced on the show, make sure you jump into those contests. Austin, I think that wraps up the show. I thought we were going to be over, but I forgot we started a bit late tonight. But regardless, that wraps up the show. Let everybody know your DFS content that they can find every week.
Yeah, you can find me here every week, and you can find me on Thursdays for the Thursday Night Showdown slate contest. And then more importantly, make sure you're joining the Discord. That's where we talk the most. DFS are able to give you live feedback and also split our lineups together, which is part of the joy of doing this.
Yeah, and I want to give credit to Austin, Gator J, and our good buddy HoofTube. You guys have been so lively in the Discord. It's been so fun to watch the community grow over there. We're answering trade questions. We're answering lineup questions. We're answering DFS questions. Make sure you guys jump in there. Follow Club Fantasy on all the socials at Club Fantasy FFL. You can find the website clubfantasyffl.com. That is where all the articles and our rankings can be found. Me and Austin have our rankings out Tuesday morning. They get updated throughout the week. So if you guys are looking for more advice from us, you'll find it at clubfantasyffl.com. Guys, it has been a rough guys and girls, it has been a rough season for QB injuries, but that is why we lean on DFS. When your quarterback is hurt, you can come here, build a new lineup, have a little bit of fun, make some DFS friends. Good luck this week. See you guys next week.